The NES and SNES Classic are two of Nintendo's best systems that they have ever released. Even though they're just snapshots of the history of the company, they've done a lot of great work into making sure that their old games work really well on those tiny little systems. But some companies out there just want to have all the fun without putting in any of the effort. And so they've released these knockoff clone systems that aren't the NES or SNES Classic, and they're so much worse. They're filled with tons of terrible games, and they don't reproduce the games properly at all. And you would assume this would have ended here. No other company would really want to continue making terrible systems, right? Well, they have. A company just recently released a console that we got that happens to be one of the worst systems we've ever seen before.
Before we begin exploring this train wreck, I need to tell you what the name of this console is. Now, you would assume that it'd be called the SNES Classic or some variation of that name to rip off Nintendo, but that's not what they did here. This system is called, and I'm not making this up, Classic Mini HDMI TV Game SX86 Mini Games Console Entertainment System. They can call it whatever the heck they want, but I'll call it what it truly is: garbage. The console itself looks just like the European SNES Classic or the Super Famicom, which is great, you know, because when you look at the box and you see PlayStation controllers, you're likely to be very confused. And those PlayStation controllers aren't just any PlayStation controllers, they happen to be the worst ones ever made. When you hold on to the controller, it feels so light and fragile, like you're about to break it. And the entire thing feels so plasticky, it's not even funny. The D-pad, all those little individual buttons pop down all at once, which is incredible because all they needed to do to fix that was put in some kind of central pivot. And if you touch the little shoulder buttons at the back, they're so wobbly and fragile that you're just shocked that these things actually work at all. But by far the most offensive thing about these controllers are the completely terrible analog thumbsticks. These things are made from genuine 100% garbage plastic, and they do not feel good when you touch them. Typically on the top, there'd be some kind of soft rubber to be so delicate on your finger and make it so easy to play games. But with this, they slide on around because they were made with no care or love at all. The exact same amount of effort that went into the controllers went into the console itself. It feels hollow and it feels very plasticky. And when you just lightly touch it, you can hear the plastic creaking, which is such a great sign of build quality. I could spend an hour looking at all the problems I find just on the box itself. Look at the top here where it says Neo Geo and you see a picture of Street Fighter. Do you really think any of the Street Fighter games showed up on a Neo Geo platform? Oh, and take a look at this perfect model family. They look nice, don't they, all wearing their nice little crispy white shirts? Well, look at that little boy holding the controller. Look at that controller a little bit closer and you'll notice that they photoshopped the controller in so badly that he clearly isn't touching any of the buttons. But all of this is nothing, right? As long as the console plays games well, that's all that really matters. But if you thought for one instance that this console was actually gonna run games properly, you got another thing coming. Folks, buckle in, because it's about time for us to take a look at one of the worst consoles we've ever looked at on the show. Now folks, before we turn this beast on, we have to play it safe and read the user manual. And when I did, I found a couple of choice sections that, well, you just gotta hear it for yourself. Number 4 of Introduction of the Machine's Function. Game console buttons for the 4 function keys to support even the fight function. Opponent speed and operational requirements are higher, the game is better. What did any of that mean? Despite the fact the box shows a kid playing, you have to read the manual because it states in the attention for using section, never allow children play it alone for it comes to the power using. Again, gibberish. Okay, it doesn't look like the manual is gonna be much help. Let's just turn this thing on. And? Okay, it doesn't look like it's working. Let's try that again. Let's turn it on and? All right, it's still not working. Let's push the reset button. Still not working. Okay, let's unplug it and plug it back in. And there we go, finally. Good, third time's a charm. Or maybe not, because sometimes when you turn on this thing, it will have a card reader error. Unlike other video game systems we've taken a look at that have a whole bunch of games built into the system, this one does come with games, but they're all on an SD card included inside the system itself. If there's ever an issue with reading that card, the system has to be turned off and on again in order for it to actually operate. But if you're unlucky enough, the system will finally turn on where you will be able to choose from a selection of preloaded games. Let's take a look at the first selection, Neo Neo. What is that? How did you misspell Neo Geo? Alright, let's just get in there. Well, here's my first pet peeve. Every single one of the games that are preloaded on here are still zip files and they're not properly titled. Yes, you can tell what a couple of them are, but some of them are a little bit more difficult than others. Okay, let's try Magical Drop 2. Now, regardless of what game you choose on this system, they all start up with this exact same screen. And from here, you have a bunch of options. But I just want to highlight a couple of them because they're really, really dumb. First is Game Guide, an option that has absolutely no purpose whatsoever because absolutely no games on this entire system make use of it. That means that when you try to start it up, nothing happens. Completely useless. Next is the Load Progress option. Now this would be really cool because it gives you a bunch of save states so that you can load a game at any point while you're playing. But unfortunately, they kind of forgot to put in the save state function, so there's no way to use it. But I know what you're saying. Shane, just go to the setting option and from there go to keyboard mapping and change the controller layout. Well, guess what, folks? When you try to do that, the system doesn't recognize the controller that is actually plugged up into the system, so you can't remap any of the controls for any of the games you're about to play. But I think one of the worst problems is that if you really looked at the screen we had just shown you, the one with the Load Progress, Game Guide, and setting on there, you will notice one thing that's missing. The Start Game function. That's because they didn't have one there. What you have to do is reset the emulation every time you go to play a game. So you go to the top and push Restart. That's the only way to start any game on this entire system. Unbelievable. I have to imagine what happened here was that they were going to have some kind of resume function. You know, so when you turn off the game midway through playing, you can resume where you left off. But they just didn't do any of that and kept the restart button there. Bravo! As insane as this might sound, I'm willing to overlook a whole lot as long as they manage to get the Neo Geo games themselves to run properly on this system. Alright, let's see. How did you mess that up? It's the beginning of a Neo Geo game. It's the one thing you've got to get right, and you must have seen that this wasn't correct. It's incredibly bad. That has got to be one of the most iconic intros to any arcade system ever made, and to just not hear it properly, it's like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, and as for Magical Drop 2, it runs at exactly half the frame rate you would find on a real Neo Geo. It makes the game entirely unplayable, and that's on top of really bad sound emulation and terrible input latency. These exact same problems will affect every single Neo Geo game that you play on this system, meaning that everything on here is unplayable. But it gets better because if you looked on that list of games, you will find non-Neo Geo games that were hidden in here, like Street Fighter 2. And because Street Fighter 2 wasn't running off Neo Geo hardware, it might actually have a chance of running well. Let's see. It almost looks like it's running properly, right? But if you listen to it a little closer, you'll notice that the entire game is running about 15 to 20% slower than it should be. This affects everything from the music to the sound effects, and especially the gameplay. If you're lucky enough not to have the game crash on you, which will eventually happen, you will notice certain visual glitches like screen tearing, or in some cases, actual whole assets in the game are broken, like these clouds here. Every single arcade game on here has visual issues and artifacts, but I think what makes it so much worse is the control problems. You've got input latency issues where buttons are just registered far later than they should be, and then, I don't even know how to explain this, the controller seems to be broken or it's the way that the console accepts inputs. I'm not quite certain what it is, but what I can tell you is that when you're playing Street Fighter or any game, sometimes when you go to do something, it just doesn't do what you wanted it to do. By that I mean, if you push up in Street Fighter, you would typically jump, but sometimes it will be punch, or sometimes punch will be forward, or sometimes forward will be up. It is incredibly maddening because you just can't play anything properly. So I personally think that everything on this system that's an arcade game is completely unplayable, whether it be a classic Capcom game or anything from Neo. So let's shift our focus over to GBA. Now, when you think of Game Boy Advance, what's the first character you think of? Is it Crash Bandicoot? Well, I hope it is, because that's the character that's on top of the menu here. But what's really funny is the image they used is from Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy, the new release in 2017. That means that this system here must have come out sometime after the release of this game, proving that this system was originally released to rip off the SNES Classic. As if you didn't already know that by now. But how about those Game Boy Advance games, huh? How do they run on here? Well, about as bad as you could imagine. Yes, the emulation isn't perfect. Yes, the games run slow. Yes, there's a whole bunch of graphical inconsistencies that makes your mind melt. But it's the controls, again, that seem to really be the most offensive part. I had hoped that some of the input problems would have been limited to just the arcade games, but they seem to travel on over to the Game Boy Advance. This tells me that this isn't an emulation problem, but it might be a problem with the controllers themselves. Now, whether it's the controllers or it's the actual system, well, I just really don't know. But what I can tell you is that the majority of the games on here, at least the ones that turn on, are not worth playing because of all the issues involved. Next up on the chopping block is SNES/PS1. That's right, they put them both in the exact same library. I have no idea why, but let's first take a look at the SNES games. Okay, so Donkey Kong Country 2 is one of the greatest games on the Super Nintendo, and on this system, it seems to be running it visually fairly close, but there is a new problem that has arisen. Now, the input latency is gone, but now you've got a combination button problem. What I mean by that is, let's say you're holding a certain button down to run and then another button is pushed at the same time to jump. Well, if you do that with this controller, it just does something wildly different. For instance, in this game, if you try to run and jump at the same time, you just jump upwards or jump backwards. No joke, it makes a platforming game where you run from left to right pretty impossible. But the fun thing about running any Super Nintendo game on this console is that they all have very different issues. Now, they all seem to carry along the combination button input problem, which is just so much fun, but you get a lot of other problems like Toy Story ramping up and down in speed. Just look at this. Why is that even happening? Or even this. This is Metal Warriors, which seems to run somewhat okay when you get into the game, even though it also has the speed ramping up and down. But take a look at the opening intro for the Konami logo. It sounds like somebody bashed their face off a piano. But nothing, and I mean nothing, is as bad as how Super Mario RPG runs off this system. Just watch. Speed issues, control issues, and sound issues, and visual issues. Everything that could go wrong is going wrong with this game. And just like all the Super Nintendo games you're going to be playing on this system, nothing seems to work properly. Which is incredible considering that it is supposed to be a ripoff of the SNES Classic. Okay, but maybe it's just the fact that it's a Super Nintendo and that seems to be a little bit more processor intensive than something like, let's say, a Sega Genesis. Well, look, they have Sega Genesis games on here. That picture there, though, isn't of a real Sega Genesis, that's actually a knockoff clone one, but whatever, let's not get into that. Let's just see how the games run. Alright, let's try the cult classic Alien Soldier. Now, if you were to play this on a real Sega Genesis, it would sound and look like this. But how does it perform on this system? Well, have a look. That just sounds terrible and it looks bad too. But not only is this a problem in terms of visuals and audio representation, but it also has an issue with the way you control the games. Because for a game like this, where you're moving from left to right, the controls on here seem to be worse than the Super Nintendo. We physically couldn't jump over this box. No matter how hard we tried, we just couldn't make it happen. pretty much every single Sega Genesis game you dare to play on this system is gonna be broken in one way or the other. And even if you try to muscle your way through the experience, you'll come across games that are in Russian. If you can read Russian, that's fine, but nowhere on the box does it state that you need to have knowledge of that language, 'cause I sure as heck don't! And even if you look past all of that and still think you can break your way through into playing these games, you'll come across a couple titles that do not work at all. Now yes, they start up, but sometimes something goes completely wrong. This here is Batman and Robin, which typically looks like this when you play it on a real Sega Genesis. Beautiful background effects, wouldn't you say? But now look at it on here. The entire background is gone! There are things going on in the game, including platforms that you can leap onto that you simply can't see. So without that being there, it's basically impossible to play this game unless you had played it before and memorized where everything is. But who the heck would do that? The game runs drastically slower than the original. How is that happening? There is no background. The system is not processing any of the things that the Genesis would have processed faster. How is this happening? How is that even possible? So clearly games aren't running well on this system. That much I think you can all tell by now. But let's avoid the games we do know and get into some very strange titles that are thrown onto this system. Like on the Sega Genesis, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This is just a hack of Mick and Mack. Clearly you can tell because, well, listen to the opening theme of this game. Cool! Yeah, that totally sounds like music you'd hear in the Harry Potter universe. Look, this game isn't very good, and I don't know if it's because it's a hack or it's running on this system. Whatever it is, it shouldn't be played. And as weird as it gets, it's not even the only Harry Potter game on here. There's also this other one that, I don't even know what's going on here. At least the first one could conceivably be a Harry Potter game, even though that character didn't look anything like Harry Potter. And this one, it clearly is some kind of puzzle collectathon, and I played it for a long time trying to beat it. This one's really bad, folks. And that brings us to the last section on here, Famicom. Basically, these are just NES games. Every single game on here is bad in every way you could imagine because of all the emulation issues we've already shown you. And because all of the controls are bad too, you can't play anything. It's really funny to just see so many Famicom games run so poorly on this hardware, but then you kind of come to expect it by this point. And I think that wraps up the console. Wait, I think we forgot something, didn't we? Oh, that's right. Look at the middle of the menu there. That says SNES/PS1. We didn't look at PS1 games yet. Okay, let's see what this thing has to offer. Right at the very top of the SNES game selection list, you'll find a folder called PS1, and when you open it, you get 2 games. Just 2. But that doesn't matter, right? All the other consoles seem to have like 1 billion games on this system, and none of them seem to run well. If there's only 2 PlayStation 1 games, there's a really good chance that maybe, just maybe, they run perfectly. Nope, I was wrong. These are bad. These are very, very bad. They're not running the way they should be. First one here is Last Blade, and well, it's not really running that great. You can actually tell how bad it's running by taking a look at the shadows underneath their feet. And every single problem that we've had with the controls with every other game, same thing here. So this is unplayable. Okay, that was pretty disappointing, but how bad could the second game be, right? Well, the second game is Romance of the Three Kingdoms 7. Now, this game originally did come out in North America on the PlayStation 2. On the original PlayStation, there was only a Japanese release, meaning that this game is, totally in Japanese. And because there is tons and tons of menus you need to go through, unless you understand Japanese, you're not going to be able to play it. But even if I could, I have so many doubts that the game would even run that well to begin with. Okay, so let me get this straight. One of the games on the PlayStation list is actually a Neo Geo original, so they could have just had the Neo Geo version on here, even though that still wouldn't have run well. And the other one is a game you need to understand Japanese to play. Those are some very questionable choices, but I think if it ended here, I may have been okay. I think I may have retained some sanity, but there's actually 2 other hidden PlayStation games lost in the list of SNES titles. And I found them, and they are by far the worst games on the entire system. The two PlayStation games we just looked at, you know, the ones they're actually proud to show you, those ones don't actually have 3D graphics. They're 2D based games with 2D sprites, maybe some rescaling going on here or there, but they do not make use of 3D models. Now, that's kind of strange, right? If you were going to include some PlayStation 1 games, wouldn't you include one of them that was actually making use of 3D models or something? Well, they do have one, hidden. It's called Soul Edge, but why didn't they include it in the PS1 bin at the top of the list? Call me crazy, but this right here might be why. What frame rate is that even supposed to be? Is that like 1 frame a second? If the game was running this badly, why would you keep it included on the system? Clearly, you must have turned this on. There is only a handful of PlayStation games. You selected this. You chose this. You must have noticed something was wrong with the game. The moment you put in any command, it takes a full second to see it happen on the screen. This is beyond embarrassing, folks. They stole this game. They could have taken any game that could have possibly run better, but they didn't. They took this one and thought it was decent enough to show off on their console. And it could have ended there. I could have left this system alone and not hunted for more PlayStation games, but I was so certain there was one more left, and I found one, the very last game on this entire system. And oh boy, I've got no idea what to make of this. It's a game I have never heard of before, but soon it's gonna be burned in your memories just as it is in mine. At first I thought someone was playing a trick on me. If you go to Wikipedia, you will not find an entry for this game. Maybe after this video comes out, someone will write one, but at the moment of recording this video, it didn't exist. This game is called Ugetsu Kitan. It was created in 1996 by Tonkin House and Will. Those are companies you might not be familiar with, but I assure you they do exist. The game starts up with a video sequence where you see some kind of ball with images in it, then it turns into the moon, then it starts to rain, and then all of a sudden, there you go, a freaky girl with white eyes. The mirror you're looking at shatters, then the character that you're playing at, I guess, is in a hospital. He runs to the top floor of the hospital, jumps off the edge, and then finds his way in front of some weird-looking tent. With the video sequence over, the game begins right there, in front of that tent. Now this game is some kind of point-and-click action adventure where you can look around, speak to people, and stuff like that. But again, it's all in Japanese, so I've got no idea what's going on. You click around a bit and eventually you find yourself in a bamboo forest that is completely shrouded in darkness. Now this area here, you just keep walking around endlessly, but once in a while, stuff like this happens. What even is that? I have no idea what's going on, and there's tons of weird, creepy characters in this bamboo place, and they're all just so strange. Sometimes you'll find yourself in some weird situation with really creepy visuals all over the place, but you always find yourself back in the bamboo forest. But because I can't understand what's going on, I've got no idea how to escape the place. And maybe this game is actually running really well, but I have no idea because I've never seen this game before. So my only question is, why would they include this on the system? This has no reason at all. Maybe some people knew Soul Edge and the other games, but this one was not a popular game as far as I can tell, to the point that no one has really ever talked about it. This is creepy and weird, and I never want to play this console ever again.
Both of the classic systems from Nintendo have been on the market for a while now, and we really haven't heard anything about a Nintendo 64 coming out, so I'm just gonna have to assume that we're not gonna see any of those knockoff systems anytime soon. But until that happens, systems like this are likely gonna keep arriving on the market. Terrible systems that try to emulate what the NES and SNES Classic are and fail doing it. If you ever see one of these in the wild, make sure you avoid it, and never, ever buy these if you're thinking you're gonna get a bargain, 'cause you're not.